Picture a mother in 1764 standing at the edge of her cottage in rural France, watching her 14-year-old daughter disappear down the path toward the pastures. The same walk the girl has made 100 times before. The same morning mist clinging to the valleys of Gevaudan. Jean Bull will never come home. Her body will be found hours later with her throat torn out, her skull crushed like an eggshell, and her head nearly severed from her body, hanging by threads of flesh. The local priest will refuse to give her last rites, not because of how she died, but because of what killed her. Over the next 3 years, something will slaughter over 100 people across this remote province. Seasoned wolf hunters who killed thousands of wolves between them will stand frozen in disbelief when they see it. It will shrug off musket balls, walk upright on its hind legs, and choose its victims with an intelligence that defies every law of nature. When King Louis X of 15th's own gun-bearer finally kills what they claim is a beast and parades it through Versailles, the attacks won't stop. They'll get worse. And here's what changes everything. The autopsy report from 1767, lost for nearly 2 centuries, revealed human remains in the creature's stomach alongside surgical scars on its body, marks around its neck suggesting it once wore a collar, teeth filed into patterns that serve no natural purpose. This isn't just some historical curiosity. This is a story of how an entire nation was brought to its knees by something that officially doesn't exist. Let me take you back to the summer of 1764, to a remote province that was about to become the epicenter of France's darkest nightmare. Gevaudan wasn't just isolated. It was the kind of place where medieval Europe hadn't quite let go. Thick forests carpeted the landscape, broken only by scattered villages where maybe 50 souls huddled together against the wilderness. No proper roads, no regular patrols, just shepherds, farmers, and their children trying to scrape a living from rocky soil while wolves howled in the distance. The 7 years were had just ended, draining France of money and men. The young people who survived were often alone in the fields, watching livestock, vulnerable, perfect hunting ground for a predator. But the locals knew wolves. Every farmer could tell you how to scare them off, how they moved, how they hunted. Wolves were just part of life, like bad weather or poor harvests. So, when a young woman tending cattle reported being attacked by what she described as like a wolf, yet not a wolf, in April of 1764, people dismissed it. Her cattle had driven the creature off. She was hysterical, confused. Then came June 30th, and Jean Bull's mutilated corpse. The parish register would later record something unprecedented. The priest wrote that she had been killed by the ferocious beast. Not a wolf, not an animal, but the beast. As if there could only be one. As if everyone already knew what he meant. Within weeks, the attacks exploded across the region. But these weren't normal predator kills. The beast wasn't eating its victims, at least not entirely. It was destroying them. Witnesses found bodies with heads twisted backward, faces torn completely off, throats not just bitten, but excavated. One survivor, a young boy, described watching creature kill his friend. It placed its paws on his shoulders, almost gentle-like, before opening its mouth wider than any wolf could and taking his entire head inside. By September, 7 people were dead. By October, 12. The creature seemed to be everywhere at once, attacking in broad daylight in multiple locations, sometimes on the same day, miles apart. It showed no fear of humans, no normal animal behavior. When groups of children tried to defend themselves with sticks and stones, it would sit just out of reach, watching them with what survivors called eyes like hot coals, waiting for one to separate from a group. The beast's appearance defied classification. Every witness agreed on certain details that made no sense together. It was the size of a calf or young bull, far larger than any wolf. Its fur was reddish-brown with a black stripe running down its spine like a hyena's mane. The head was massive but wrong, elongated like a greyhound's, but with a snout witnesses compared to a calf's, broad and flat. The tail was its most distinctive feature, longer than a wolf's, thick as a man's arm, with a prominent tuft at the end that it could allegedly use to knock full-grown adults off their feet. But it was the way it moved that truly terrified people. Witnesses described it bounding across fields in leaps of 20 feet or more, its back legs propelling it with impossible power. One shepherd watched it clear a stone wall, that was 7 feet high without even slowing down. Another saw it stand on its hind legs, perfectly balanced, using its front paws to try door latches. Captain Jean Bates Duhamel, a military officer sent to investigate, wrote to his superiors with barely concealed panic. It has a breast as wide as a horse, a body as long as a leopard, fur that is red with a black stripe. You will undoubtedly think, like I do, that this is a monster, the father of which is a lion. What its mother was remains to be seen. The local response was chaos. Farmers abandoned their fields. Children were kept inside. Markets emptied as people refused to travel. The economy of an already impoverished region began to collapse. Desperate villagers tried everything. Poisoned bait traps, organized hunts with hundreds of volunteers. Nothing worked. The beast seemed to know exactly where the ambushes were, which paths to avoid when the hunters would be distracted, and then something extraordinary happened that would transform a local crisis into a national obsession. On January 12, 1765, the beast attacked 8 children near the village of Vere. But instead of another massacre, 10-year-old Jack Porfay organized the others into a defensive formation. Armed with nothing but pointed sticks, these peasant children fought off a creature that had killed grown men. They jabbed at its eyes, struck its nose, stayed together when every instinct must have screamed at them to run. The beast finally retreated, bloodied and frustrated. Word of this David and Goliath encounter reached Versailles. King Louis X, perhaps seeing an opportunity to distract from France's recent military humiliations, personally rewarded the children. Port received 300 livres, a year's wages for a laborer, and the king paid for his education. More importantly, Louis X declared that the full resources of the crown would be deployed to destroy the beast. Suddenly, Gevaudan was flooded with professional hunters, soldiers, and glory seekers. The king announced a bounty of 6,000 livres. Newspapers from Paris to London began covering the story, turning it into arguably the world's first international media sensation. The Courrier d'Avignon published breathless updates. British papers mocked French incompetence. How could the mighty kingdom of France not kill a single animal? Captain Dew led massive hunting parties, sometimes with over 1,000 volunteers. They had a perfect opportunity in October 1764, when the beast was cornered at the Château de l'Abbé. Dozens of muskets fired. The creature fell. Then, as hunters watched in disbelief, it stood up, shook off the blood, and vanished into the forest. Dow's official report noted that it had been struck by several balls, but showed no significant injury. By February 1765, with Dow's failures mounting, the king sent his own specialist, Jean Chilmac Denoval, and his son, renowned wolf hunters from Normandy. Denoval père boasted he had personally killed 1,200 wolves. He arrived with a pack of specially trained bloodhounds and supreme confidence. For months later, he had nothing to show for it but dead wolves that weren't the beast. The attacks, meanwhile, evolved. The creature was learning. Early on, it had avoided cattle, apparently intimidated when bulls charged it. By spring of 1765, witnesses reported it killing cows with ease. It began entering villages in daylight. One afternoon, it walked through the center of a hamlet, ignoring fleeing residents, and killed a child playing in a doorway while his mother watched, paralyzed with terror from inside. Then came Marie-Jeanne Vallée. On August 11th, 1765, the 20-year-old was crossing a stream with her sister near Paul Hack when the beast lunged from the undergrowth. But Vallée was carrying a makeshift spear, a bayonet fixed to a pole. As the creature's jaws opened to engulf her head, she drove the blade deep into its chest. The beast howled. Witnesses said it sounded like no animal they knew and fled, leaving a trail of blood. Francois Antoine, the king's own gun-bearer, who had recently taken over the hunt, personally investigated. He found Vallée's blade still wet with blood and tracks that matched no wolf he'd ever seen. Impressed by her courage, he wrote to Versailles comparing her to Joan of Arc. She became known as the Maid of Gevaudan, and today, a statue stands commemorating the moment a peasant girl wounded a monster that had eluded armies. Antoine was 71 years old, but he was perhaps France's greatest hunter. Methodical where others had been chaotic, he studied the beast's patterns, his preferred hunting grounds, the phases of the moon when it attacked. On September 21st, 1765, he was ready. In the forest near the Abbey of Cheese, Antoine and his nephew encountered an enormous wolf. It stood 32 in at the shoulder, massive for a European wolf, and measured 5 feet 7 inches in from nose to tail. It weighed 130 pounds, and one shot it to the head with a musket loaded with 5 balls. When they brought survivors to identify the corpse, several recognized scars they had inflicted during attacks. One woman pointed to a wound on its shoulder where she'd struck it with a pitchfork. A boy identified a missing toe he had cut off with a sickle. This had to be the beast. Antoine had the wolf stuffed and sent to Versailles, where it was displayed at court. The king declared victory. Antoine received over 9,000 livres in rewards and a lifetime pension. The nightmare was over, except it wasn't. On December 2nd, 1765, barely 2 months after Antoine's triumph, 2 boys were attacked near Lasser-Saint-Marie. The older fought off the creature and saved the younger. The beast was back. Or perhaps it had never left. The new attacks showed a creature that had learned from its experiences. It no longer lingered after failed attacks. It avoided open ground where hunters might be waiting. It struck fast and vanished. Some witnesses noticed it seemed wearier of humans now, as if it remembered Mohegan Valley's spear. But the king refused to acknowledge the attacks had resumed. To do so would mean admitting his celebrated victory was false. Newspapers were discouraged from reporting on Gevaudan. Officially, the beast was dead. Unofficially, people kept dying. Local authorities, abandoned by the crown, tried increasingly desperate measures. Ishan Lafon, the regional administrator, proposed leaving poisoned dog carcasses in the beast's hunting grounds. The young Maki Daper organized civilian patrols. Prayers and pilgrimages increased. The Bishop of Mende had already declared the beast a divine punishment for sin. And now people believed God had sent it back because their penance was insufficient. Through 1766, the killing continued sporadically. The beast seemed more cautious, but no less deadly. Parents would find their children's remains arranged almost ceremonially, heads placed separately from bodies, organs removed and laid out in patterns that looked deliberate, almost like messages. By spring of 1767, desperation had turned to resignation. The beast was simply part of life now, like plague or famine. Children sang rhymes about it. Mothers used its name to frighten disobedient toddlers. The economy adapted. Shepherds worked in groups. Markets adjusted their schedules to daylight hours, and strangers were viewed with suspicion in case they were the beast in human form. Then came June 19th, 1767. Jean Chastel was a local farmer and hunter, 60 years old, who had participated in the hunt from the beginning. Some said he was an oddball, a loner who knew the forest too well. He had even been briefly jailed in 1765 for allegedly misdirecting Antoine's hunt. But on this day, he joined a hunting party organized by the Marquis d'Apcher in the woods of Mount Mush. The various accounts of what happened next differ in details, but agree on the essential strains. Chastel had positioned himself at a forest clearing, reading a prayer book. Some say the Liddy Ness of the Virgin. The beast emerged from the trees, and according to witnesses, stopped. It looked at Chastel. It didn't charge, didn't flee, just stood there as if waiting. Chastel calmly finished his prayer, closed his book, took aim, and fired once. The beast fell dead. The autopsy, performed immediately by Dr. Bilan of Sorgue and recorded by notary Rochdion Marin, revealed horrifying contents in its stomach. The collarbone of a young woman, femur fragments that appeared to be from a child, and pieces of clothing. But there was something else. Something the report mentions, almost in passing, that changes everything. The creature had 42 teeth, the absolute maximum for any canine, arranged in a pattern that didn't quite match any known species. Its stomach contained not just human remains, but materials that suggested it had been fed by human hands. Worked leather, traces of prepared meat, even what appeared to be bread. When they examined the beast's body more carefully, they found old scars and precise patterns that looked less like battle wounds and more like surgical modifications. Double dew claws on the hind legs, a trait found in certain domestic dog breeds, but never in wild wolves. And around its neck, so faint they almost missed it, were marks suggesting it had once worn a collar, a thick one made for control. Chastel wanted to present the beast to the king to claim his reward and glory. He had the carcass roughly preserved with straw and began the journey to Versailles. But it was summer, and the preservation was poor. By the time he reached Paris, the corpse stank so badly that nobles fled the room. The famous naturalist Comte Buffon was ordered to examine it. His conclusion was swift and dismissive. A large wolf, nothing more. The remains were hastily buried in a nobleman's garden. No reward for Chastel. No acknowledgement from the king. Just 72 liver from local authorities and a return to obscurity. But the attack stopped completely. Not a single death after June 19th, 1767. The official story solidified quickly. The beast of Gevaudan had been a wolf. Perhaps 2 wolves, maybe a small pack. Exaggeration and superstition had transformed normal predation into a monster. Case closed. Move on. But the evidence tells a different story. Let's examine what we actually know versus what we're told to believe. First, the death toll. Official records acknowledge at least 80 dead, but parish registers suggest over 100 with another 150 injured. Some estimates go as high as 124 killed and 300 wounded. These aren't normal wolf attack numbers. Jean-Marc Morisot, who cataloged wolf attacks across France from 1500 to 1800, found about 9,000 deaths total over 3 centuries. The beast of Gevaudan killed more people in 3 years than most wolf populations kill in decades. Second, the behavior. Wolves are opportunistic hunters that prefer weak prey and avoid humans unless rabid or starving. The beast specifically targeted humans while ignoring easier prey. It attacked in daylight, entered villages, and showed tactical intelligence. When children formed defensive groups after the Portefeuille incident, it began targeting adults. When hunters used female decoys, it ignored them. When poison bait was laid out, it wouldn't touch it. Third, the physical evidence. Every single witness, hundreds of them, described an animal that didn't match a wolf. The size alone was wrong. European wolves rarely exceed 100 pounds. Yet, this creature was consistently described as calf-sized. The coloration was wrong. Wolves don't have black stripes down their backs. The tail was wrong. Witnesses described it as longer than a wolf's and capable of being used as a weapon. The head was wrong, broad and flat rather than narrow and pointed. Modern investigators have proposed various theories. Kahn's take, a biologist, argues the descriptions perfectly match a subadult male lion. The toy coat, the black mane stripe young males develop. The long-toothed tail, the incredible jumping ability, the size. Lions are also known to become man-eaters under certain conditions. But how would a lion get to rural France? And why did no one recognize it as such? Others suggest a striped hyena, pointing to contemporary engravings that label the beast as a hyen. Hyenas have a distinctive back ridge, the powerful jaws capable of the devastating wounds described, and would be completely foreign to French peasants. But striped hyenas aren't known man-eaters, and again, where would it come from? The most intriguing theory involves human intervention. The marks on the beast's neck, the surgical scars, the domestic dog traits, the fact it seemed to recognize Chastel, all suggest training. Some researchers propose someone deliberately created a hybrid, crossing a wolf with mastiff or other large dog, then trained it to kill. The leather and prepared food in its stomach support this idea. But who would do such a thing and why? Consider the timeline. The attacks began just as France was recovering from the 7 Years' War, a humiliating defeat that had cost the monarchy enormous prestige. Suddenly, a crisis emerges that allows the king to play hero, to unite the nation against a common enemy, to demonstrate royal power by slaying a monster. When Antoine killed his wolf and the attacks continued, the crown simply denied reality rather than admit failure. Some historians suggest the beast was a form of rural terrorism, possibly connected to religious tensions between Catholics and the Protestant Huguenots, who still existed in remote areas. Others propose it was the elaborate criminal enterprise. Kill people, blame a monster, loot the corpses, and abandon farms. The strangest theory comes from the discovery of those surgical modifications. In the 18th century, there was a fascination among certain aristocrats with creating exotic hunting challenges. What if someone, perhaps even someone connected to the royal court, had engineered the perfect predator, released it in a remote province to create a sensation, then when it became too problematic, arranged for its death? This would explain why Antoine's wolf wasn't the real beast. It was a decoy to allow the king to claim victory. It would explain why Chastel, an obscure local farmer, succeeded where professional hunters failed. He was in on it. It would explain why the beast seemed to recognize him, why it stood still for him to shoot it, why he was so calm in its presence. The Marin autopsy report lost until 1952 contains one more detail that haunts researchers. In describing the creature's teeth, Marin notes they were worn in an unusual pattern as if filed. Filed teeth would serve no natural purpose, but they would make wounds more distinctive, more terrifying. They would make a monster. We'll never know the complete truth. The physical evidence is gone, buried in some Parisian garden. The witnesses are centuries dead. The royal archives that might have contained relevant documents were destroyed in the Revolution. All we have are fragments, testimonies, and questions that multiply the more we dig. But consider this. In 1766, while the beast was still active but officially dead, a traveling menagerie visited southern France, its star attraction, a tame wolf that performed tricks for audiences. The menagerie's owner claimed he'd captured and trained it himself. He demonstrated how it would respond to commands, how it could be made to attack stuffed dummies on cue. The owner's name has been lost to history, but local records show he left the area suddenly in early 1767, just months before Chastel killed the beast. He abandoned his menagerie, including performing wolf, which was found dead in its cage. When authorities examined the corpse, they found something unusual. Surgical scars on its body and marks around its neck from years of wearing a heavy collar. Just like the beast, the French government has never officially acknowledged any conspiracy or cover-up regarding the beast of Gevaudan. The standard historical narrative remains unchanged. Mass hysteria transformed wolf attacks into a monster story, but certain documents remain classified in the French National Archives. Requests to view them are routinely denied on grounds of historical sensitivity. What could be sensitive about wolf attacks from 260 years ago? In 2016, a French researcher claimed to have briefly seen one of these restricted documents before it was pulled from his hands. He managed to read only a few lines, but they were explosive. It was a letter from François Antoine to an unnamed correspondent at Versailles, dated October 1765, after he had supposedly killed the beast. The letter began, "The theatrical performance proceeds as planned. The substitute has been displayed to great effect regarding the original specimen." That's all he saw before the document was confiscated. The beast of Gevaudan killed its last victim on June 18, 1767. 19-year-old Jean Bastard. She was found in a field, her head nearly severed, her body partially consumed. The next day, Jean Chastel ended the terror with a single shot. The timing seems almost orchestrated. One final victim to remind everyone of the monster's reality, then a heroic resolution. Whether the beast was a wolf, a hybrid, or something deliberately created, the real horror isn't the creature itself. It's that someone somewhere knows exactly what it was, and they're still not telling.